How many more stragglers do we have? Some? Okay. Right. Am I turned on or? Yes. What? Yes. Jason? Yeah? Ooh, here we go. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, welcome to you all. 79 participants from 13 different countries. My usual graph, my usual fight with Excel last night to get it just right. Do I need to stand right here? No?
Keep talking, otherwise.
Right, okay. Yeah, no, I seem to be back. Okay. Of those participants, 18 are from Dyalog'. As usual, we bring pretty much everyone here so they can meet with you and you can meet with them. Tell them what you like, what you don't like, and we're here to listen and to do various bits and bobs around. So all dialoguers, can you please get up? Thank you. Yeah, there's... Okay. There's also 17 people here that's here for the first time, which I think is sort of a record. So welcome to you all, and I hope it's not the last time we see you. We hope you enjoy the user meeting and get enough home with you that it's worthwhile coming back for more. Of those 17 first-timers, we have Jamin Wu, who's the competition winner. Jamin, please get up. Thank you. Jamin will tell us on Thursday how he won on Wednesday, how he won the competition. But usually people would like to know who it is so they can approach and talk and try and convince the competition winner that this is the lifelong career they've just entered. This year we have one more competition winner, and this is the first time that the non-student competition winner has joined us for the user meeting. So Torsten, sit up. Welcome.
Thank you.
There are also some people we are going to miss. Harriet Neville was signed up for this user meeting, but sadly, on the 23rd of August, she passed away completely unexpectedly. Harriet had a long career in APL and started at IP Sharp Associates in the late 70s. And she was instrumental for the largest APL conference ever held, the 79 one in Rochester. She left IP Sharp and then worked as an independent consultant for many years, Niagara Mohawk and later at Xerox. I sort of met with Harriet, and it was an instant liking between us, and so we met with all these conferences that we've been to over the years. And it's funny how these people you work with also becomes your friends, and obviously how much you miss them when they're suddenly not there anymore. There is an obituary page. There's a link here, and you will have access to the slides afterwards, so if you want to contribute or visit that page. And there's also a memorial in October. You can go there. And sadly, it doesn't stop there. On the 18th of February, we lost our genius, gentleman and mischievous schoolboy, John Scholes. John, as most of you know, was one of the original implementers of Dyalog' APL, together with Jeff Streeter. And he kept, in his own word, trying to finish that program that he had started on back in the early 80s. And just weeks before his passing, he finished the Mantis item 16, which was a long-standing inconvenience in the language. He was also the creator of the defense bridging his first love, APL, with a second love, functional programming. He was an excellent teacher and a mentor for the younger members of our staff. And I haven't seen a devastation like that in the weeks following his passing at the offices at Dyalog'. We really, really miss him. He was also a brilliant producer of small APL demos for the web, YouTube, and John's Game of Life is now almost 200,000 views, which is quite exceptional for something as technical as that. There's a memorial page for John, and there's a video section there where we have helped assemble all the bits and pieces he did for YouTube for us. And I mean, you might want to revisit the social skills for programmer, or maybe its hardware store, or also called a plea for simplicity, the thing about the hammer. That was quite sophisticated. It had us all in tears when he presented it at these user meetings, and so we won't have more of them. But we shall remember him dearly. Oh, and speaking of hammers, after 7 years of snakes and 7 years of ships, we are now entering into 7 years of hammers, I hope. In the Norse mythology, cosmos and chaos were called respectively Innengard and Utengard. So that means within the gods or outside the gods. Asgard was the homeworld of the gods, and Midgard was the home of humanity. And those two together were seen as Innengard, the organized part of the cosmos, while the giants and their worlds, all the unpredictable and uncontrollable items, were seen as Utengard and chaos. Thor is the god controlling the forces of nature. When he drives his cart across the heavens, you see lightning and there's thunder. And he also controls the rain and the fertility of the land. Using his hammer Mjolnir, is the most powerful weapon in Asgard. Thor is fighting a constant battle against chaos and the giants. The hammer always hits its target, and it always returns to its owner. But it's also used to consecrate crops, or maybe wedding couples, or other things, children that's been born, given name as such. So when something or someone is consecrated with Thor's hammer, it was taken from the realm of chaos and absorbed into cosmos, protected from the ill effects of chaos and its denizens, and sanctified and sanctioned by the social order and divine models. And I think that's pretty much what we can do with APL. Bring order into chaos. So, yeah. The giveaways this year, we've gone all ecological, or eco-friendly at least. So it's recycled materials and organic cotton and bamboo fibers, etc., etc. Better to keep on the safe side of the hammer and not mess with nature. So, after this meeting, when we get back home, we didn't have the energy to do it before we left. We'll make Dyalog' APL available for unregistered non-commercial use. We've previously had an annoying version, but we'll remove that. It sort of popped up every half hour and said it was unregistered and would they not like to register. So the new one will be completely identical to the commercial version, and we'll also remove the educational version because there's no reason to have that. There's really no difference between that and the non-commercial in the future. And why we're doing that is because we really want APL out to young people. And one of the things that happens is that when they get to a page and they have to give you their name, all these big multinationals has made sure that this is not something you want to do lightly. And why should they trust us not to misuse this information, especially being a commercial company? I mean, disgusting. So we're trying to see if we can actually overcome that obstacle to more young people trying out APL and using it. There is one difference. Version 17.1 will display a message in the session explaining the condition of this particular license, and that's determined from the license number. So it'll tell you whether this is an unregistered version, not to be used for commercial use, or it's a non-commercial version, which means it's registered, not to be used for commercial use. So if if you get one of these messages, or God forbid it, one of your customers get one of these non-commercial or unregistered messages, please talk to us, because you probably haven't got your license number in the right place. So the system don't detect that you have actually paid and you are allowed to use it for commercial purposes. We are actually seeing a growing interest in APL among young people. So this step, we think, is the right way. There's another reason why we are doing it, is that Morten wants to put Docker containers on available so that they can just be used, tried out, and downloaded. And we can't have these Docker containers, particularly not if you want to scale to like 20 or maybe even 1,000 parallel Docker containers running, that each of them have to be signed into. One of the things we could have done was obviously to go open source ourselves. But we've been thinking long and hard about it, and we think there's two reasons why we can't find a good business model for that. And one is the necessity to keep the Apl interpreter consistent. Means that inviting everybody in to contribute to the interpreter itself would either be a fake attempt, or we would have to do a lot of work to make sure that everything was fitting in with what we are providing upfront already. And it would make, I don't think with an open source that our efforts to have an identical system across all the different platforms would appeal to an open source crowd. On the other hand, contributions to the toolchain, which has started to happening, and submission of libraries to GitHub, where we have Dyalog' libraries, is a completely different matter, and we welcome that very much. The sharing between APL users of tools and good programs to solve different problems in a specific professional area. So we encourage that very much. And we are going to make quite some work to organize what's on GitHub so that it's easy to find. Right now it's a bit of a tumultuous repository, I would say. The second reason is we care about people, and it's really hard to see how we would be able to pay the salaries of the people necessary to maintain the Apl Interpreter and the support. So, I mean, actually, in our opinion, software development is an honorable profession, and that people should be allowed to work normal hours, not working for free during the night, and be able to raise a family on the salary they are paid for it. Right now, I can't see how we would do that if we went completely open source. But if some of you have ideas, I have not seen examples in the market either that's been really successful with that. And by the way, we do offer a really fair pricing model where young people, entrepreneurs, can test ideas out without paying fees to us, as long as they sign up for a royalty contract. That means that at the point in time where they start earning money, they also pay a fee for Dyalog' Apl, being 2% of the revenue generated. And I think, I mean, if you don't think you can be more than 2% more efficient using Apl, you shouldn't use it. I think it's vastly more productive to use Apl if you want to test new ground and make money from that. And the 2% is just a very small addition you have to make to the price you'd have to take anyway. We want to spread the gospel. We are running into these issues about being commercial, and young people don't like it to give their name and all that stuff. So we are trying to mediate all that. But we hope you will help us spread the word. So we made a Viking challenge this year that's directed at this. I won't reveal too much more of that, but I'd like to encourage all of you to turn up to the Viking challenge. There are no strenuous exercises or any hard work or anything, only fun and creative teamwork. So please, on Wednesday at 1 o'clock in this room, you'll get the introduction. Oh, and one final thing, no, two actually. If you see Daintree looking a lot at his phone during this conference, it's not because he's unattentive or bored with your presentation. It's because he's blogging from this event. So he's actually doing his job, and he's listening even more attentive and to be able to report on it. So tonight here is the last thing. There's an Apl team challenge that's managed by Roberto Minervini and his 3 students. You might start thinking about teaming up with people now. The Viking challenge will be teamed up based on the animals on your badge. So you might want to choose to do that, or you can do it differently tonight. But it might be a good idea to start talking to your peers. You will recognize them when you look at their badge. Oh yeah, and there was the thing about the taxi lists. I mean, if at the end of the thing you want to share a taxi with someone, Fiona has a list where you can sign up when you're going, where you're going. That's just a minor thing. But with that, I hope you'll enjoy Dyalog'19, and I'll hand you over to Morten.
I'm not sure if there are any questions about the licensing, maybe from some of the younger folk, how that sounded to you while I get hooked up. Or catch us in one of the breaks.
Yep.
the... Is this it? Oops. Oh, did the granddaughter appear? She's not supposed to appear on... I'm going to play some sound at the end, so I need my PC hooked up for audio. There we go. Hopefully that'll work. Okay. Good morning and welcome. Of course, the 17 first-timers, it's wonderful to see you, but it's really good to see those of you who are here for the second time. And of course, first-timers, when you come again, you'll be really welcome, even though you're not first-timers anymore. So after all the fun I've had with my title CXO, some of you may have noticed that I'm now the CTO again. There's one more person we're missing this year. He didn't pass away, he was headhunted. So Jay Fode, you will have noticed, is no longer here, and I'm the CTO again. But since that's something I've been for most of my professional career, I can live with that. So my job is to try and really put into context most of the talks that you'll be hearing from other members of the Dyalog' team later this week, and pretend there's a cunning plan behind it all. So to give you an overview of our strategy, our goals, and we're really here to make it easier for all of you. First of all, for the newcomers, we want to make it easier for people to discover APL and get hold of it, as Gitte was talking about, making it easier to download. Once you're in, we want to make it easier for you to create and, of course, deploy the solutions that you make in APL. We want to give you all the tools that you need to be competitive while you're doing that, so you can compete with solutions developed using other tool stacks. It's important that your solutions are not just standalone solutions, but can be integrated. So your solutions need to be integrated with other applications, other development frameworks. And of course, something that's really becoming a big focus now is the development process, that if you're developing things in Dyalog' APL and maybe using other tools as well, you've got some HTML, some CSS, some JavaScript, etc. It's really important that you can integrate Dyalog' APL into whatever greater development processes that you have in your organization. And of course, once you've built the systems, you need to easily be able to maintain not just your own code, but also the APL system itself. So we're working hard to make it easier to update your APL system and keep it running. And of course, at the end of the day, it's all about, well, at least for us, having fun and making money. So I'm going to dive into each one of those a little bit more and talk about things we've done recently and things that are about to come that you'll hear more about in talks this week. So making it easier to discover and learn APL is actually something that we're spending a growing amount of time on. One of the things that's been really successful is Adam's work in Stack Exchange. I don't know how many people have been to this site. Oh, that's better than last time. So this is really taking off, and we've had benefits from this. We've hired somebody who came to us from this. And it's really a place that I would recommend also those of you who are out to recruit young talent. You should have somebody present here answering questions, listening to what's going on, and seeing who looks like they're any good. So one of our new consultants in the US, Nathan, came to us through the Orchard. One of the other things that we think is important in terms of attracting new people is making sure that APL code starts appearing out there on the internet where people are looking. So open source APL projects, and those are also starting to rapidly increase. I think there are now at least 100 different GitHub projects containing APL code, and that's really a curve that's going up. So Acre Desktop from our friends at the Carlyle Group, a project management system, and of course all of the code that we now write at Dyalog' in APL. So not the C interpreter, we haven't yet figured out how we could open source that. Maybe it'll happen one day. But every line of APL code that we write pretty much ends up as open source on GitHub. We're making all of the tools available as collaborative projects, and really happy to see that some of the customers are really getting engaged in that as well. We're not doing all of the coding anymore. So here's a screenshot of our own GitHub repository. The first one there, Tamstat, you'll see is private. That's something you can't see. That's something we're working on internally that we will make public. And then we've got my server and link, and I can't remember how many there are now, probably 50 or 60 public projects from us. Another group that really is starting to post a significant number of GitHub projects is the Carlisle group. Acre Desktop, Rumba is a web framework, both client and server tools to make it easier to do TCP stuff. It's really good to see that, and we're really happy to participate in those projects and maybe even co-fund some of them. Webinars and webcasts. We've been doing webinars now for nearly 2 years. Richard Park, who's here, joined us late last year. He's becoming the driving force at Dyalog for those. We can see him here a few weeks ago talking about molecular dynamics with the Jupyter Notebook, showing how to do cool things in APL. That's something that, again, we're putting more and more time into. So there's going to be, I've tried to, in each one of these sections, list some of the most directly related talks that you'll see later this week. So Richard is going to redo some of his molecular dynamics stuff tomorrow evening at 8. Adam is going to talk about ideas for finding ways to do things in APL. So far, I think our reference material is reasonably good if you want to find out how dyadic IOTA works. Most people know how to do that. But if you want to know how to read data from a particular file format, Adam's working on new ways for people to ask questions like that and get answers. And Richard's going to be back on Thursday talking about creating Jupyter notebooks. And of course, we're slowly increasing the number of talks that members of the Dyalog team do outside the APL community. So in particular, this year, Marshall and Aaron have already been to LambdaConf in Boulder. Marshall, Aaron, and myself are heading for Bangalore again in November to speak at Functional Conf. And we're doing an increasing number of lectures at various universities. So this is me in the outfit. Daval here on the left has been running something he calls Code Jugalbandi, which means jam session in Indian music. And he's picked various developers through the years that he's thought were doing interesting things, and then he'll do this jam session where, in this case, he did something this is a Mars rover we were simulating. You can see the track here of how the Mars rover was moving through the landscape in a non-looping solution written in APL. And Daval will do the same thing in JavaScript or one of the functional programming languages. And then we'll have this to and fro. And it's very, very popular. It's one of the most popular sessions in Bangalore when we do these things. It's quite entertaining. So that's a lot of fun. I'm doing it again this year. That's in 8 days. Poughkeepsie, Marist College, the ACM chapter there is hosting a talk on APL. So we're trying to get the word out, as Gitte said, spread the gospel. And anybody who's involved in an APL user group anywhere in the world, if you're organizing a meetup or you'd like a speaker from Dyalog, I mean, almost anywhere, right? Even Australia. You can probably attract us. Actually, it's a long time since we've been in Australia and New Zealand. It's time for a trip out there. Dyalog will send somebody, almost guaranteed. Yeah, we'd like to come to Australia in February. Yeah. Anyway, so Gitte talked a bit about this. It's really important to make it easier to get hold of APL. We're finding it's actually, if you go to functional programming conferences in particular, it's quite easy to get people interested in APL. But then we've found that this barrier of having to sign up to get hold of a copy of APL is really a problem. You can play with TryAPL, and I think Richard Park is working on a Jupyter notebook thing server that will be running permanently, where you can go in and execute APL expressions in Jupyter notebooks. But the most important thing, and one of the reasons why version 17.1 was late, and in fact Gitte said we didn't get it all done, we're going to have to finish this work when we get back home, is to make Dyalog' APL available for non-commercial use on Windows, Linux, and Mac without any form of registration. So you'll just be able to go to the Dyalog' page and get hold of a copy, download it, and be running in minutes. And if minutes is not good enough, and you have Docker installed, then you'll be able to do it in seconds, just by typing docker run dialog/dialog, and the name of a file containing some APL code that you want to run, and it'll fire up a Docker container and run your code. And as Gitte pointed out, making the Docker containers available has been one of the primary drivers also for making it unregistered, so that people will be able to fire up, Lambda functions in the Amazon framework based on Dyalog' APL without having to fill in forms. Yeah. So in addition to just the basic Dyalog' container, which contains the Linux, a really minimalistic Linux system, only just enough that's required to run Dyalog' APL, there are also containers that have some of our server frameworks pre-installed. So you can get containers with my server, with the Jupyter Notebook framework, the JSON server, and Brian's latest work, the REST server, which is a very simple framework for just throwing APL functions into a RESTful web server. Those are available as Docker containers that you can just add a few files to and be running. But it's important to note, it's not free software, even though you can now very easily get hold of it. And this Windows, Linux, Mac is really getting important. So here's an email we got not very long ago. And the young person, I believe, says, I regularly use and develop for all three systems, Windows, Linux, Mac OS. I would appreciate a license for all three. And in the past, our admin team would have had to deal with 3 different applications and send this person links. In the future, hopefully we will eventually hear from this person, right? The thing that worries us, of course, is people are going to be using the system, we won't know about it, and we won't have any opportunities to interact with them. But of course, the way things work today, you have to accept that, and if they get excited, they'll post stuff on GitHub, and then you'll learn about it when they start using it. So here's just a screenshot of the Docker Hub, as it's called. A bit like GitHub, there's a repository where companies put their Docker images. So here's the Jupyter framework, which had 72 downloads, and my server, which had, nearly 1,000 downloads. So once you've got hold of it and you've written your application, of course, it needs to be easier also to get your application out there. So work we've done in version 17.1, the Docker containers that we've talked about, we've spent quite a bit of work on supporting Apl Running Headless. So that means Apl running in a Docker container or on a Windows server that doesn't have a terminal attached. And there's work we've done to make sure that Apl runs smoothly in those circumstances and uses less, doesn't allocate GUI resources, for example, allows you to run a much higher number of service processes under Windows. And of course the work on RIDE, the remote debugger, so that you can always easily connect to a headless interpreter and debug it if you need to, if you've set up the firewalls and the security. Work that we're doing in version 18 to make this even easier. One of the big problems now, if you really want to write an application and distribute it to multiple platforms, or say develop it under Windows and deploy it under Linux, is the way that the interpreter and applications typically get configured is different from one platform to the next. You've got the registry on Windows, you've got environment variables on Linuxes, and we're working on a way to create a configuration file that Dyalog'.apl and applications written in Dyalog'.apl can use, where the same configuration file can just be shipped to any platform. So you can use that file to develop on Windows and just ship it to a Docker container with Linux, and it'll all work. And there's a lot of work that's been done. There'll be several talks on this week about the importance of getting your APL source code into text files so that you can use Git and GitHub and so on. And there's a small corner still missing where you really need an APL workspace, a binary workspace, to launch your application. With version 18, it's our goal that you'll be able to write an application entirely using text files, and that will also allow you to launch it. So the Apl interpreter will be able to run from an application which is only consists of textual source files. So Richard's going to be talking about the cross-platform configuration files. Jeff's going to be talking about shared code files, which is not mentioned here, but is also a deployment technology for making it possible to get your applications in a server environment running very efficiently. Lots of services can share the same program data without having to read it from disk. Jeff will talk about that. Okay, so in terms of developing competitive solutions, what are we doing there? Well, version 17.1 had very little new functionality. It still managed to be one of the latest Dyalog releases in history. Part of the reason for that was this HTML renderer that we've been trying to get to work reliably on all of these three platforms and package it with APL. That turned out to be a lot more difficult than we thought. We developed very little code, but packaging it and testing it and getting it to be reliable on all platforms was a significant challenge. We think that's really important. A lot of people are going to be writing service components that they integrate with other UI, but there's still going to be a need forever for APL developers to build a full stack thing where they've got at least a simple UI on top of a prototype. And the HTML renderer will allow you to develop, well, state-of-the-art UI if you use the right tools and deploy them on all of the platforms. Version 18.0 is going to have lots of new features and lots more visible work. Sort of invisible is the performance, but we recognize that performance is actually one of the most important things when it comes to your being competitive in the marketplace. Although the work done on performance isn't necessarily very visible, it's very important and something that we put work into in every release. In fact, this is work that was done in the version 17 timeframe mostly, but we decided not to put into version 17. It's stacked up for 18, and further work will be done in the 18 timeframe on performance. So we have another blue tsunami. Hopefully they don't contribute to warming of any kind. We've decided we finally have some ideas for date-time conversion tools. It's something we've been thinking about for decades. Finally, Richard thinks he knows what to do. He's going to be talking about that. And this sounds trivial, but again, it's something that happens, is used in almost every application in the world as tools to convert between uppercase, lowercase, or what is the word? The comparison case. And there's an Apl To Excel project, so a tool that's going to allow you to create Excel spreadsheets from APL without having to have Excel available and start it up and use OLE automation. So this is going to work on Windows, on Linux, and on the Mac. And it's going to create XLSX files, which are zip files containing XML, using only APL code, except for the zipping. So there's quite a lot of talks in this area at this user meeting. Richard is it Christmas yet? Is about the dates. Marshall is going to be talking about performance in his talk on implementing reduction. Brian will be giving us an overview of what's new in the HTML renderer in this latest release. Josh is going to be talking about tools on top of the HTML render to help you develop HTML renderer UI. And Nathan is going to be talking, if he's able to connect to us from Denver via the internet, about the Apl To Excel project. Okay, so integrating with application, integrating your solutions with applications and frameworks. In version 17.1, this is something that's actually been available experimentally for a while, but is now properly documented and packaged in 17.1. There's a way to take APL code and wrap it as a completely ordinary dynamic link library or shared object on all of the platforms. So where we've had good tools for doing this on Windows for decades, I think probably 3 decades if you go back to the earliest COM stuff, that only worked on Windows. Now you're going to be able to create linkable libraries on any platform. And of course, .NET is back. So the history of the .NET framework now, of course, is quite long. It originally appeared in 2002, and Dyalog' back then had been invited, in fact, to participate in the design of parts of .NET, and were in the advanced wave of implementers. So just a few months after .NET became available, there was a special release of Dyalog' Apl 9.5, which supported .NET Framework 1.0. So the .NET Framework version numbers now, I believe, are up to version 4. But Microsoft has been working on really changing the way the .NET Framework is implemented. They've been working on, for many years, on something they call .NET Core, which was really targeted at mobile platforms, so tablets and phones. So that's been around for some years and is now up to, I believe, almost version 3.0, and the square turned into a circle. What Microsoft has now decided is they're going to have a new thing just called .NET 5. Correct me if I'm getting this wrong. It changes regularly, so there's no core and there's no framework. And the intention, Microsoft's intention, is to fold both of those into the same framework. And again, WLM, Windows, Linux, Mac. So the .NET framework is going to be available on all of those. And as John will talk about, I hope that's not too much of a spoiler, our intention is to support the .NET Core, or the .NET 5, sorry, got to get the terminology right, in version 18.0. And of course, the value of this, it makes a huge collection of libraries available for encryption and security and storage and everything related to the web available for APL application development. John will talk about that very soon. Okay, so a really big area of focus for us, we had workshops on this yesterday, is integrating with tools for source code management, building, testing, and deploying. So in version 17.1, the tool that's been around experimentally for a year called Link is now ready, we think, for the big time. It still has a couple of warts. Please help us remove them. But the intention is that Link will replace Salt as the recommended interface to source code manage, or to enable source code management in the future. And so that's for your applications. The next thing we're going to be looking at is packaging the Apl Interpreter up so that you can have the Apl Interpreter itself as part of your continuation integration pipelines, as the terminology is. So that means supporting things like Linux apt-get, and on Windows NuGet or NuGet, I'm not sure, probably NuGet, so that you can have new versions of Dyalog' Apl just seamlessly integrated when you are building at least experimental versions of your software. Okay, so Link is really important. I'll be back later today with Adam to talk about that. And the next steps that we see there is we need a way to implement APL packages, have a repository of APL packages. It's fine to have things on GitHub so that people can go and find the source, but you want to be able to say, I'm writing an application and I need the Dyalog' cryptographic library, and just put that in a configuration file, and then automatically something will bring that into your environment. It's something people expect in any modern development environment, to be honest. Yeah, and where for the last several years we've really been working hard ourselves to build these things, what we're really hoping and we're starting to see the germs of is being able to participate in open source projects with members of the community. Maybe fund them, at least, participate in design, work with people outside of Dyalog' to produce these libraries. So Adam and I will be back later today. Paul Mansour, I've taken the liberty of including on this slide here. He's going to talk about a Git workflow, so tools that he's been working on to make his life easier once he started working with Git, how to manage the workflows. Maintaining the applications themselves, something we maybe haven't spent so much time on in the last couple of years. We've been focusing on other things, but it's, well, with the exception of the last one here. So the RIDE and the Windows development environment, those for the last couple of years, there have been some tweaks, but they've sort of settled down. They're moving on at a steady pace. So there's this nice little technology war, arms race now between the RIDE group and the Windows development environment that's driving little improvements on both sides. This is a screen. This is actually Windows Explorer, and showing the work that John has been doing to integrate previewers into the Windows. So if you just have a file system that contains some of these Dyalog' source files, I think this is in a standard installation now. This will get set up on Windows. So if you just click on one of these files, then the same way you could preview a text file or a CSV file. This actually launches a runtime copy of Dyalog' APL in the background and uses the editor to preview files. And there are little improvements like this, what are we calling this? Token highlighting. So if we put the cursor there on the if, it highlights the corresponding else and end if to make it easier for you to work. Little tweaks like that, nothing major. The thing that's really major, and an area where I think we're likely to spend significantly more time in the years to come, is making it possible to use third-party tools. This is something called VS Code, which has rapidly become one of the most popular development environments out there for C#, JavaScript, any programming language at all. So there are now add-ins for VS Code that allow you to edit APL code. And of course, the huge advantage of that is then that's seamlessly integrated with, in this case, we're looking at a Git repository. And we're looking at the list of commits. And I've expanded one of the commits. So there was a commit with the text file system watcher threading issue. And the file system watcher.apln namespace file was changed. I click on that, and VS Code, without any work being done on Dyalog's part, is correctly showing the APL code changes and works just fine with APL source code. So I now probably spend at least half of my time when I'm editing APL code in VS Code rather than in the Dyalog' editor, because I'm always using GitHub. And the advantage of being able to have all of this in one place is huge. Of course, I am also using the tracer and editor on the side. Version 17.1, we've actually done a fair amount of this sort of invisible work to the APL programmer, but we've done a significant amount of work on making it easier to maintain the APL system itself. So where we've had this slightly weird patch workspace in the past, where you had to load a workspace and then it updated some of your executables. Sometime soon after the user meeting, we'll start issuing MSP files, which will be the same mechanism that just about any Windows application uses. It'll update all parts of your Dyalog' Windows installation, not just the executables, also workspaces and other files if we decide to reissue them. On other platforms, it's always, I guess, been a bit simpler. You get these package files on Mac and Deb and RPMs on Linux, and you just reinstall them. They update everything. On the Raspberry Pi, we've been using the apt-get system, and we're hoping to eventually get that working on the other Linuxes as well. And for those of you who have internal audit departments or IT departments who want to be sure what it is you're installing on all the corporate machines, we're now by default signing all of the Windows executables, and of course we make hashes and signatures available on the other platforms. Okay, so to summarize, version 17.1, not a lot of visible functionality, but a lot of work done on making APL easier to get hold of, easier to verify with the signatures, easier to maintain, and easier to integrate into processes and applications. Version 18.0 is going to be much more visible stuff. There'll be performance enhancements. There'll be the cross-platform .NET bridge. There'll be cross-platform configuration files. There'll be the ability to entirely have your Dyalog' APL application written in source with no binary workspace required. There'll be new system functions if everything goes well in the development process. Of course, this is the user meeting. Before the release, some of these things may not happen. I hasten to add. Critical focus areas. For us, source code management, packages, dependency management. One of the things we're finding, we now have customers working on really integrating into the cloud, and it looks like the hard problem to crack there is how you do authentication and security. So I think that's a focus area for us in the next year or two, is figuring out which of these interfaces we need to try and make available to you. There are things called OAuth, open authentication, OData for exchanging data, and so on. This is the $64 million question, understanding whether .NET 5 really is going to achieve widespread adoption and people will be happy to use it. You know, we all believed it was going to be Silverlight at one point, so we're all still a little bit nervous about these things. And of course, always performance. For you, if I may be bold as to suggest focus areas, get your source code into text files. Everything else gets easier after that. You get access to so many wonderful tools. And it doesn't have to change anything about how you develop and interactively debug APL code. This can be achieved with no change to our inalienable way of life. Think about how you're going to add encryption and security to your applications, because eventually somebody's going to demand that you put it on the cloud, and then you'll have to know how to do that. And take apprentices. I mean, I'm hoping some of the new first-timers here are people who've been recently hired to do work in APL. Well, I know that some of them are, because at Dyalog we have, as I mentioned, Richard Park joined us last year, and he's working on documentation, samples, webinars. We've just started a consulting team in the US. So there are Dyalog consultants. Josh, who is here and will be speaking, and is a previous winner of the Dyalog problem-solving contest. Nathan, who came to us through the APL Orchard and is not here, he's in Denver, and he's involved in a theater production, which I understand involves tango. And they have shows this month, so he couldn't physically be here, but he is going to be doing a talk on the Excel interface if we get the technology to work. And we are actively recruiting. We are interviewing people coming to see us for a new C developer job before the end of the year. Yep, and to wrap up, a world premiere. So one of the things I really enjoy about the APL community is that it's full of talented people whose talents go beyond programming. And we, as you know, have been running webinars for some time, and this has inspired one of our users to write us a jingle, because webinars should have jingles. So here is the Dyalog' jingle. This is the long version. Lasts about a minute. It can think of questions. And plan to come to webinars. So you can hear it again. Thank you, Stefano. Inspired by Odin's two ravens who go out into the world to seek news and bring them back to us, and then we do webinars based on what we learn. So I think I actually left time for 3 minutes worth of questions. I realize this is a shock to people. So probably nobody prepared any. Are you wanting me to go and stand here? Oh, people should come and stand here. But it doesn't look like there are any. Oh, there is one. Diane. I'll go back over here then.
In an environment in which our users can't patch themselves. So we have one central user who patches and then deploys on the network.
Yep.
So could you speak a little bit more about how that will work?
So I imagine that in that scenario, that person who has the rights, who does the distribution, will be installing our patches and then deploying it using whatever mechanism they normally do. I assume at the moment they use the patch system. They patch executables and then they put them somewhere where people can do the install. Yeah.
Right. I was just curious about your comment that it was not just patching the executables anymore, it was patching other things. And
yeah.
so I wanted to understand what those other things were and how would that work in this network environment. So what are the other things that are going to get patched?
Well, it'll be any file that's in the Dyalog distribution. So it'll be the help files and the workspaces and the script files and so on. So I imagine your IT person is going to be patching their their model system and then redistributing from that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, I guess John gets one extra minute to tell us about the core. Thank you.
Can I try the clicker? Yeah. Right, excuse me while I get everything plugged in. There's one other thing I'm going to need to do as well. Gitte mentioned that I was blogging, which is nearly correct. What I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of the Dyalog' APL tweeting during the conference, and I tweeted a picture of Morten as he started his presentation. I tweeted a picture of Gitte as she started her presentation, and I now just need to tweet a picture of me as I start my presentation. And given then, it seems a good use of that extra minute that I have. This probably isn't going to work, is it? Yeah, I can't. It's a bit obvious that it's me then, rather than some anonymous Dyalog' employee if I do that. So we'll take this picture. I've already written the text, so I can just, if I know how things work, I can tweet, load a draft, get the text, add the picture. Is that the right picture? It's a bit blurry. I haven't got my glasses. There you go. So there you go. That's tweeted. So like away, please do. So it's always a little bit scary following Morten this early in a conference, because I never know what he's going to give away, what he's going to tell you about that I've already prepared 6 PowerPoint slides for. As it turns out, there's not been a great deal of overlap, so that's handy. So this is the title of what I want to talk about. I toyed around with other titles. I really wanted to call this something else we should have done years ago. .NET Core was released, .NET Core 1 was released in 2016. Okay, so years ago pretty much just means 2 or 3. We're not ridiculously late coming to the spending the time looking at the .NET Core stuff. In the end, I ended up with the subtitle, .NET is dead, long live .NET, because as Morten mentioned in one of his slides, and I'll just gloss over this very much now, Microsoft at the moment have 2 very distinct versions of .NET things. They have the .NET Framework and they have the .NET Core. And as Morten said, with .NET 5, basically, they're coming together, or at least maybe it's not even coming together. The framework's going away. I'm going to be left with something that's built from the .NET Core framework all the way up. The .NET Framework itself is not really going to see any further development, although, of course, there will still be fixes to it and support. And it, you know, as is often the case with all of these frameworks, people will still be using that 10 years from now with legacy systems and so on. But it's important that we move on and start using the .NET Core from Dyalog'. So we'll need to investigate the feasibility of a .NET Core bridge. And there's a number of reasons for doing this, not least of all because we have to. Come 2020, where .NET 5 comes out, you guys are going to want to use that. We're going to need a bridge to allow you to use that. It's also portable, as Morten mentioned. The .NET Core is available on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, which is 3 of our main platforms. So it would be useful to get the tools there. It's also open source, which is very handy. I'm always in 2 minds about open source. It's reassuring to know that the source code is there if you want to look at it, but as yet I've never wanted to look at any of it. And I've also never felt obliged to fix anyone else's code, even though it's open source. I'll still log a bug against something and expect someone else to fix it. So the open source for me is a bit of a red herring, but it's reassuring to know that if you want to figure out how something works, you can look at the source code and figure it out. The surprising thing, as I was doing the development with the .NET Core bridge, was how much code we had in our bridge and how much code that one could use from Apl that was straightforward compatible between .NET Framework and .NET Core. So broadly speaking, if you know what you can do with our .NET Framework bridge now, you might as well just go away for half an hour and come back later. There may be one surprise in this presentation, and quite possibly the worst segue that I've ever made in a conference presentation. But really, there's no surprises happening here. Let me start off, though, for those of you that haven't used the .NET Framework stuff for a while, let me just start off with a quick recap of things that we can do with the .NET Bridge. This is my Windows session, so I've got some scripts that I'm just going to run. So the .NET Framework is comprised of a bunch of assemblies, dynamic libraries that we can reference from the interpreter. We have a system variable called quad using, which basically tells the interpreter what we want to use. A single element like this pretty much means we want to have access to everything that's within the .NET, within the default libraries in the .NET Framework. So here, for example, I can access a date-time object. If I set my using to a non-empty value, that says I want to use the system namespace, which means I don't need to type system all the time. I can just elide that bit, and the interpreter still knows how to find the date time. I can parse a string to generate a date time. Functions in .NET Framework have a lot of overloads. And something that we did quite late with a .NET Bridge was we added the display form of .NET functions to list all of the overloads so that you can see what those functions are. Let me make this window a little bit bigger. Okay. We can access, we can create arrays of date times. We can get the year for each of the dates in the array. We get autocomplete on our date time, so we can add hours to each of the dates, and so on and so forth. We can access the file system, we can access the environment, we can generate a list of all of the files that are in our temp directory, all through the .NET Framework, and we can get a list of all of the .NET assemblies that are loaded into our process. So that's a brief recap, a summary of .NET stuff that we've been doing for, as Morten says, 20 years. We can find out what machine we're running on. But what they're telling us with the .NET Core is that this now, if we have a .NET Core bridge, should all be portable. Which means that, is this my water or is this? It's mine. Da. Which means that in theory, if they're not lying to us, we could switch to a Mac desktop. Here we've got a version 18 with Ride on the Mac. And if the .NET Core is as portable as they tell us it should be, we ought to be able to, on our Mac, in a clear workspace, say we want to use the .NET framework and say we want to create an instance of a system date time object. We might say, well, I don't want to type system all the time, so we'll inline that by setting quad using. We'll do the now, we'll parse a date time. We'll look at the display form of all the overloads of the parse thing. You're paying way too much attention. We can create vectors of date times. We can have autocomplete on our dates, so we can add 1 year to each of our date times. We can access the file system. We can list all of the files in our temporary directory. And we can list all of the assemblies that are loaded into the process. So if it was portable, we'd be able to do things like that. And we can find out what we're running on there. So the key, is there a? No. OK, so the important thing here, look, it says we are running on JD's MacBook Pro. The operating system is a Unix version 18. And this here is telling us, no surprises now. Even this isn't a surprise given the title of the presentation. We're running version 3.0, so this is .NET Core 3. Preview 8, which I'm using now, they released Preview 9 on Thursday, I think. And had I been a little bit more on the ball, I might have updated to that. I know an hour ago, but it seemed a bit risky. So, yeah, so it looks like it works. Is it portable? It looks like it might be a little bit portable, so that's sort of handy. So anyway, so we needed to write this new bridge. So I'll give you a little bit of a history of the transition. It's not a transition, it's a completely starting from scratch. The framework bridge that we have is comprised of approximately 1,000 lines of C# and 20,000 lines of C++. And was developed primarily with, any guesses? Shout them out. What would you reckon we developed the .NET bridge with? VI. Of course. Why would you use it? We might have not used VI for the debugging, but the code writing and all of the development was done in VI. It's time to move on a little bit. So the new bridge is predominantly now written in C#. Okay, and the process is essentially taking the C++ code that we have in the original bridge, cutting and pasting it into the development environment for the C#, looking at it very closely to make sure it's all doing what it should be doing, taking advantage of the greater power that we have in C# to do things in a better way, and always with that view of what can we do better, what have we learned over the past 30 years, what can we optimize, what can we improve, what can be better. So the new .NET Core bridge is primarily developed in, any guesses? It's not VI, no. No. I mean, they're all great ideas, and to be fair, I still have typed VI, and in fact, my VI actually on my machine is an alias to Vim anyway. So it's the same thing. No, so it's developed in Visual Studio Code. But so we chose C# because it's portable, at least on the platforms that we want to run the bridge on. It's very powerful. The tooling for it is great. It's cool, not a great idea, but it's nice to be one of those. It's nice to feel young again and using the cool tools that all the kids are using. Why Visual Studio Code? Because it also is portable. You can run Visual Studio Code on each of Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. So where we want to run it is also where we can develop it. It's powerful. We'll steal some ideas from there. It is the great tooling that C# uses, so that's great. It's cool, and it's got some wonderful extensions. So C#, Visual Studio Code, all of a sudden, we're bang up to date. It's brilliant. So it would be fair to say now that .NET Core is my main squeeze. It's my thing at the moment. Bad segue. Speaking of squeezing things, let's talk about zipping files. So if we wanted to zip files on our Windows machine, we have choices. We could just quad CMD out to zip.exe, but of course that's not portable. You might not have zip.exe installed on the machine. We could and we'd also have to create the file, for example, readme.txt, put some text in it, zip it up to create the rzip file. There are functions we could use via Quad NA on Windows to access the Windows compression APIs, but it's too difficult, life's too short, and also not portable. We could use, now we've got a .NET Core bridge, we could use the zip archive that is part of .NET. A little drop down here tells me, this says it's available in .NET 4, Framework 4.8, but we can also see if we move here that it's also available in 3.0 Preview 9. Always scary, the implication not in Preview 8, but worry not. I've been through that scary process for you. Don't worry about it. So what we can do, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here, then is we can now, with our .NET Core, play with that class. So a little bit of housekeeping. What I've got on this machine is, this is a Mac. This is a Windows VM running on the Mac. So what I've got here is our directory, which is mounted on the Windows machine, but actually it's a directory that's on the Mac. It's just convenient for me to have all my demo stuff in one drive on the machine. I'm going to copy from a workspace a function called zip, and here is that function called zip. I'll try and make this bigger. Now, it's not very APL-y. What it is very .NET-y. In fact, if we go back to the web page that I was on, oh no, not that. No, don't give that away. You didn't see that, right? If we look at this C# example here, that is pretty much exactly what the APL zip function is doing. I've just transitioned it from C# in that example to APL. But basically what we do is, what we've seen is we initialize our quad using, we make sure that the directory exists that we want to put the zip file into, we create a new file stream. From that file stream, we create a zip archive. We then create in that archive an entry called readme.txt. So this is going to be the name of a file in the zip archive. We're not going to make this file readme.txt on the disk. We're just going to insert it directly into the zip file from data in the workspace. Okay, so we don't need to do that extra process of inputting anything into this thing called readme.txt. And then we're going to write our left argument message into the zip file, and I'm also going to append the current timestamp onto that message so that you guys know that I'm not cheating and I'm not just doing a bunch of things with zip files that I do. Okay, so many .NET objects may have unmanaged resources that they are keeping hold of. Okay, with garbage collection, you never know when those unmanaged resources may be released. Okay, because garbage collection may happen half an hour or 3 days in the future. Okay, because these things are opening files on the operating system, we need a stricter way of managing their life cycle. And what :disposable says is when we get to the matching end for the :disposable, the interpreter makes calls to whatever object is in the right-hand side of the :disposable statement, telling it that it can now dispose of any unmanaged resources that it is using. It is equivalent to the I don't know how to make this font bigger. It's equivalent to the using statement that we have here in the C#, which is doing exactly the same. Oh, that's good, isn't it? Oh yeah, sorry, it scrolled, that's why. It's equivalent to this using statement here. So basically it says, for the duration of this section of code, I'm going to be using this stream writer. At the end of it, you can dispose of its unmanaged resources. It's been in Dyalog' for a while. It's a useful thing. Under the covers, it basically implements or executes the iDisposable.dispose method of the .NET class. Sorry? Because localizing it only takes the name out of scope in the workspace or in the program. It doesn't ensure that garbage collection happens immediately. And if the unmanaged resources are only closed when garbage collection occurs, that may happen at an unpredictable time in the future.
It's not APL workspace.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's .NET garbage collection, not APL. Right, who knows how to close this? Because I tell you, because if I... Windows. I haven't got. If I had a Windows keyboard, that'd be Panic not. I'm on the case. I've been using Windows for 30 years. How satisfied am I with Magnify? Shall we answer? Do we want to? Anyway, okay, so let's get back to that. So that's our .NET zip thing. So what we can do is we can say, okay, I'm going to create a file called demo1.zip. I'm going to put the hello world exclamation mark in there. We can now see that in that directory, I've got that one file. I can open that file in Windows Explorer just to prove that it's a zip file like any other. There's the readme.txt in the zip file. Double click on that. And there's our text. Control plus, let's try that. APL keyboards. Okay, so 999, that's today, isn't it? 9:56. Which is what the time on my machine says, but it's not. That's not the time, is it? Well, it's funny, isn't it, when things don't work? I'm going to fix this because a lot of these messages are going to have timestamps on, and the whole point of doing that was so that it was the correct time to prove that I wasn't doing anything silly. And so I've got 10:16, so let's do that. 10. It is 10:15, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you know. So we're not going to save that. We're going to close that. Okay, so that's our zip file. We could unzip it on Windows. Not going to unzip it on Windows. I'm going to unzip it on the Mac. Okay, so on the Mac, I can now copy the same demo function. So on the Mac, this directory reference here, it's the same directory. It's got the same files in it. Here is our unzip function. Okay, which is sort of just doing the inverse of what we did in the zip. It's enumerating through all of the entries in the .NET archive, and then it's just reading to the end of that stream to get the content back out again. So we can unzip, and there's our hello world, which we put in that file at 9:56. Again, it's not written that readme.txt file to the disk. It's just extracted within the application the data that was in the files that were in the zip archive. So we can go back to Windows. We can ask, how is it going so far? Zip that into demo 2. Unzip demo 2 on the Mac. How's it going so far with 10:17, which is now the correct time? We don't want to keep zipping between the two machines just to unzip a file when we created a zip file. Let's look at the file system watcher that we have in .NET Core. So here we have a function. Hope the font's okay, is it for everybody? I've tried to make it reasonably sized. So, sorry? I can push it. Okay, you're gonna see less, but there's nothing to see here. There's no surprises here. So what we're doing here is we are going to create. This is the Mac. Remember, we're on the Mac. The desktop is a nice flowery thing. It's a Mac. The Windows desktop's got a horrible, gaudy, Microsofty, Windowsy desktop. We're on the Mac. We're going to create an instance of the file system watcher object, tell it that we want to watch the directory that we're passing as an argument. We're going to have callbacks as files are created and changed. We're going to specify a wildcard of files that we want to watch, which is in the left argument, and we're going to enable watching the events on the thing. We've got a callback on created, which is just going to spit out a couple of words into the session. We've got a callback on changed, which has got an error in it. So I'm now going to create that file system watcher. I'm now going to go back to my Windows machine, and I'm going to create another zip file. Now, watch this. Okay, so we now got a suspension on the Mac because it has detected that a file has been changed on the network drive that's being shared between the two machines. There's the file name. We can unzip the file. Now watch this, 1018. It seems about, I'm not lying to you, wouldn't lie to you. You're cleverer than that, you'd notice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this function, so that rather than just spitting things out, I'm going to unzip stuff. And I'm also just going to edit the created function. I'm just going to comment that out because it's not particularly interesting anymore. So now we can carry on. We can now move back to Windows. We can watch something else. Okay, we haven't got the error anymore, but when we come back to the Mac, we can see that we've got this watch this again, which is from the message that I've just created on the Windows machine. There are a few glitches here. They're not mine, they're .NET Core glitches, or maybe they're just accurately representing what's going on. We've got two messages here. This file was changed twice. And if we were going to do anything significant with this file, we might want to be aware of that as we were watching it. But, you know, seems to be reasonably portable. Let's load another couple of functions onto the Mac using the .NET Core framework. I've got a function here called send. What this uses is a .NET Core package that I downloaded from GitHub because Microsoft told me to do so. I Googled for how do I send emails from .NET Core. The Microsoft documentation had an implementation. It said, this is deprecated. We recommend that you use this one on GitHub. Okay, so there's a lot of open sourciness going on. There's a lot of Microsoft taking this open sourcey stuff quite seriously. So what we have here, we won't go into the details, but it's going to create a mail message. It's going to put a subject in it. It's going to send it from somebody to somebody else. It's going to authenticate on my account. That's just a one-line function, but I don't want to show you my username and password. And it's going to send an email. So we could, for example, do send I am spam, please buy my stuff. The machine will beep because it'll get an email. The machine will beep because it will get an email, as long as I'm still connected to the internet. Well, that's slightly annoying. Well, okay, so there's my email client. There is the message, which I sent at 10:22. It says, I am spam. And it says, please buy my XYZ, sent from the name of this machine. I'm not sure why I didn't get the beep, and I'm not sure why I didn't get the notification. Maybe, as we move on, we'll start getting those. I did when I was sat there an hour ago. It should be, but I should be getting a little toast notification as well. So now I'm going to edit my changed thing. I'm going to say, when a file is changed, I'm going to send an email to jddemo@dialog.com. Send, and I'm going to disclose that because unzip actually returns a vector with one element per file within the zip file. So we're going to fix that. We're going to go back to Windows. We are going to... Oh, no, we've done that already. We're going to ask to be notified when a file gets zipped. Or, sorry, when the Mac detects that a file has been created on the shared drive, it's going to unzip it, it's going to send me an email. Hopefully, it should beep, and I should get a little toast notification here, which it hasn't done, but we do see that in my email client, I've got these things that say notify me, sent from JD's MacBook Pro, and the timestamp is 10:24. That's when the email was sent. Do this again. Notify me again. Beep! Do you hear it? And there's my notify again messages in the email. Okay, so we can do the fast system watchery stuff. We can send emails, all using .NET Core. All of these functions work interchangeably on the Windows machine, on the Mac. They're just using .NET Core. It's the same workspace. I could have done this exactly the other way around. It all just works. Now, where am I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be here or am I supposed to be here? Who's keeping up? Oh, back to the Mac. There you go. It's helpful. Okay, so here's another thing that I'll set up now. We'll come back to this later. This directory here is where all of my source codes are for my development environment on the Mac. I'm going, and okay, here's some interesting statistics. In my development tree on the Mac, I have 120,000 files, approximately, and about 13,000, 14,000 directories. Okay, I've got a slightly modified version of this watch callback. What I'm going to do is I'm going to watch for star.dialog files in that directory tree. So I'm going to enable the including of subdirectories in my file system watcher, and I've got two subtly different callbacks. One's that's going to tell me that a file has been created, and the other one is going to tell me via email that a file has been deleted. So we will switch the old file system watcher off, switch this one on that source directory, and we will then forget conveniently that we've done that. So Microsoft will tell us that this stuff is portable. We've run it on Windows, we've run it on the Mac. If I now control left rather than control right on my keyboard, we're on a Linux machine. And this is a Ubuntu something or other Linux machine. But we can do all of this .NET-y stuff on the Linux machine. Okay. This Linux machine is already running a file system watcher listening for zip files in that shared folder. Now, again, there's another little glitch here in that it hasn't been sending us emails. Okay. I don't know why that is, but if I come to the directory where all of those zip files are, they're all dated. You see the time's wrong on this machine as well. It still thinks it's 9 something in the morning. September the 9th. I was either doing this live now, or I was very rudely doing this when Morten and Gitte were talking earlier this morning. It's all live, it's all now. But if I touch one of these, okay, pretend this should have happened automatically. I don't know why it didn't. But then the file system watcher on the Linux interpreter kicks in using its .NET Core bridge. And if we come all the way back over to my email client, we've now got a message that this email was sent from the JD Linux box. Okay, so, is it portable? It looks like it might be. Right, so, surprise time. It's not. I've always been a child. I gave a presentation 3 years ago about airfix models. Okay, if things go according to plan, next year I'm going to give a presentation about building things from Lego. That's the plan. Might work, might not work. Don't hold me to it. But today, now, for this project, I'm going to be a grown-up. I'm going to test. I don't like writing tests. There's nothing creative about writing tests, or so I thought. Okay. Tests are a lot of fun. Inside the interpreter, we have quite a slick way of testing bits and pieces of the interpreter. Okay, we have a lot of single-line unit tests in the interpreter source codes. Okay, if we go through our interpreter source codes, we can find a lot of, interspersed with the C code, we can see these statements which are, they're basically comments in the C code, but they begin with delts, and these are all one-line tests. And what happens is, as part of our overnight process, grabs all of these one-line tests out of the interpreter and executes them. And the nice thing about these is that the tests are really bang adjacent to the bit of C code that they're testing. Really useful, really slick, very handy, and a very lightweight way of making sure that we put tests in for stuff when we need to. Now with the .NET Bridge, it's inserting APL code into the C# and going through that process of grepping it all out. It doesn't seem very feasible to me. So we need another way of getting the test adjacency for the code with the .NET Core bridge. So let's come back to the Windows machine. So what I've got is a tests workspace that contains two very simple functions. Okay, one of them, called run, just fixes a .dialog file which is in the same part of my SVN repository as the .NET Core bridge code itself. Okay, and then the other function just fixes it and runs this thing called run all tests, which was in that script. Okay, and we run this. Oh. Now, well, yes, but it doesn't help my script. Let me just go through and see what's going on. Wow. why is this not doing the same thing? This is not how I suggest you write your tests. Wow. This. Well, no, because I modified the. Oh, yeah, probably. So what's in R at this point? Yeah, let's just. I mean, this is quite annoying because you know what it is when you're doing a demonstration in a few days. You do nothing but test it and run it over and over again. You know, in the same room, on the same computer, the same internet Wi-Fi connection. It's people. Anyway, okay, so we run, we get a 1 back, tests work, that's brilliant, that's great. Okay, so I've written a test that can return a scale of 1, and I'm even lying about it. But this isn't really how we want to test it. What we want is we want to be able to run our tests from within our development environment when we are working on the core bridge. So this is Visual Studio Code. Okay, this is the layout of the project. There's a bunch of C# in here, okay, which is the .NET Core Bridge. There's a little bit of native C++, but that's not interesting. We won't look at that. There's a folder here called tests, and here we've got this test tools.dialog file, which is the file that I said the workspace was basically bootstrapping everything from. Morten mentioned this stuff before, which is actually very convenient. What we've got here is an Apl plugin for Visual Studio Code, which was developed, I think, by Gil. Okay, it gives me syntax coloring for Apl. It gives me autocomplete for Apl. Very, very useful. Okay. So this .dialog file just contains a bunch of very simple couple of functions just to bootstrap the whole process. What I have here is I have a bunch of .dialog files containing specific tests for specific parts of the .NET Bridge. Okay, and this is the code that it's testing. These are the tests that I'm writing. The adjacency of my tests is much higher than it was before. And what I can do, again, this might... Okay, and so the way the thing's set up at the moment is if one of the QAs, if one of the tests fails, it suspends in the interpreter so I can figure out what's going on. If I was running this normally automated, then it wouldn't do that, and it would just say the test didn't work. But what I can do now is with a couple of keystrokes, I can now run that entire process from within Visual Studio Code. And on top of that, I can get code coverage of all of the C# that's in the .NET Core. So quick poll, what was a good result, a good percentage for code coverage? What would be good? What's acceptable? 50? 50%'s good? Okay. Anyone want to say that's crazy, you could never do 50? Anyone want to say 50 is not really encouraging anything? Pick numbers, anyone? Bob?
Hitachi Software Works believes it's 93.
93, okay. So assuming that my tests are going to work and not suspend, then let's just run them. Control-Alt-T. Oh, I think I can also zoom, make this stuff bigger too. So it's now running my tests. Oh, right, yes, I need to do a paren off from here because actually also what it does is it does a build. And that build's not going to work if the thing's already loaded into. So okay, so starting the tests, we may get that error again. I don't know what that error came from. Okay, so here we are. So I'm getting 99.73% code coverage on my .NET Core code. Okay, there's about 2,500 lines of C#. Within this tool, I can press this watch button here, and then I can navigate through all of my code, and I get green lines through all of the code that is hit by the tests, and I get stuff in the gutter that's my entire file. Everything that's green is a line of code that's been hit by a test. Anything that's red is a line of code that hasn't been hit by a test. Okay? Yeah, well, we'll talk about that. There's gaps in here where there's code where I have intentionally if-falsed it out, so it's not even compiled, so it's not included in the test. But we can go through all of the source files here, and we can see nice green everywhere, no red. However, there's some red here. Here's a bit of code not being tested. This is the code that loads .NET assemblies when we use quad using and we say, I want to load this assembly. And clearly, I'm missing a test that says, but what if that doesn't work? And this bit of code hasn't been hit by the code coverage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my scripts. I'm going to create a new assemblies.dialog file, okay, which gets me into the editor. Now, I've got some code snippets that I've written. So I've got one that's called :test, which gives me a generic framework for one of my tests. I'm going to call this one assemblies. Okay, so it's a namespace. It contains a variable that says what functions it should run, and it contains the function that's going to run. It's got a bit of bootstrapping around it. It returns a Boolean vector. If there are any zeros in it, your test hasn't worked. So this basically is a no-op, but there's no zeros in it, so it's going to work. I'm going to insert now into here an actual test, which is going to try and quad use an assembly that I know doesn't exist. Okay, I'm now going to just hit Control-Alt-T again, run my tests again. And we get 100% code coverage, 100% branch coverage. So not only are we hitting 100% of the lines of code, where there is a line of code that says, if this, do this, otherwise do that, we're hitting both the if and the else part of that. Now, I don't know what this means. It doesn't tell me that everything works. Okay? It tells me, I think I know two things. Because the test succeeded and I got a 1 back, that means that everything that I'm specifically testing for has generated the expected, but still possibly not the correct result, but it's the one that I coded in as in the test. So I'm reasonably confident that everything's returning the same results that they returned when I thought they were good results. Okay. It sort of tells me that I haven't got any redundant code. I've not written any code that I don't know how to call. So that's good. But it doesn't really tell me that all of the code is correct. It just tells me that it's not wrong. No, it doesn't. It tells me that I don't know what it tells me. What I do know is that it gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. What I know is if I change something if I change the code or I write some new code, first of all, I'm going to get some more red lines, so I'm going to need to write some more tests. That's a good thing to be told to do at the time that you write code. Okay. The second thing I know is that if I change something, I will know that I haven't broken something that used to work, and that's nice. But it doesn't mean that it's all right and I can ship it and it's finished and it all works. But it feels good. So that's testing. It's good, isn't it? I'm a grown-up. And the advantage is, as close as I can manufacture it, the tests are now adjacent to the code that they are trying to test. Right, so they tell us it's portable. There's a little I in here. I like this. It's Pi-ortable. Let's move over to this machine. So let me connect to a Raspberry Pi that's running in the Dyalog office. Okay, excuse the junk as we get the junk. So here we are on a Raspberry Pi. On my Raspberry Pi, I can do quad using gets quote. I can do system. I'm not running RIDE here, so I don't get any autocomplete. This is just a TTY interpreter running on the Raspberry Pi over an SSH session. So there's no RIDE, there's no GUI. But it's just a, where we were on Linux is 5 years ago, maybe. We can do this. We can find out what time the Raspberry Pi thinks it is. A little slow the first time because it's got to load some libraries up. I can load my tests workspace. I can run my run script. Okay, I get a 1 back. They're not the fastest machines in the world, these Raspberry Pis. But I get a 1 back. So I know that on the Raspberry Pi, all my tests have worked. I know that when I run my tests, I run all of the code. So I know that when I run this on the Raspberry Pi, everything that I did on all the other platforms works on the Raspberry Pi. It's warming. It's like a good drink. So yes, seems like it's portable, so that's good. So that's where we're at, okay? Bunch of stuff works. What's important is to realize is that the .NET Bridge doesn't know about sending mails. It doesn't know about zipping stuff. They're just objects and functions that it knows how to call in a very generic fashion. Okay, so I know that I can manipulate functions that take strings, and I know I can manipulate functions that take strings and numbers, or functions that return and take objects as arguments. The fact that they're mail messages, the bridge doesn't know anything about that. Okay, that's your APL code that's providing that specificness. There's a better word for that. The bridge is a very generic thing. Okay, but that's where we're at. There are a number of things missing. Let's talk about that. Well, to be fair, there's lots of things missing. Okay, but the important ones that I think it's worth pointing out is there's no GUI support in .NET Core yet. There's certainly not any in our bridge. I mean, maybe some things we need to do. Microsoft tell us that WPF is going to be supported in .NET Core. I'm not sure if they've said that for 3 or for 5, but there will be GUI support coming to .NET Core in the future. So these are the things that I've identified as missing things. Okay, there's no .NET Core for AIX, unfortunately. Okay. I'm personally hoping that we don't need to produce a classic version of the .NET Core bridge. So if any of you desperately want this and are running classic interpreters, then come and talk to us, because I'm not in a position to make that decision anyway. But it's an extra level of complexity that, because we're sort of starting again, it might be nice to get away from. At the moment, we can't load both the framework bridge and the core bridge into an interpreter at the same time. I'm hoping to resolve that before 18 comes out, because it would be nice to be able to piecemeal bring utilities in that use core while your main workspace uses the framework stuff. At the moment, we can't export any APL classes so that they can be consumed by .NET Core, but we'll come to that. And obviously, over a period of time, we're hoping that Microsoft will produce the GUI, and we're hoping that, and certainly we will go through those lots of things that are missing from the old implementation and bring them across into the .NET Core bridge. There are a bunch of specific things that now might be a good time for us to tweak and to change. And we've got 25 years of experience with the, not 25, why am I saying 25? We've got 17 years of experience with the framework bridge. There are a number of things in there that I know aren't ideal, and I'm sure there are lots of things that those of you that have used it will be aware of that are a little bit clunky and that maybe you would like to see us change them. A few examples, we're not very good at supporting generics or nullables of type T. If this doesn't mean anything to you, then that's great. If it means anything to you, then you can tell me whether things need to be changed or not. C# now has optional name parameters to functions in addition to the overload mechanism that it's currently got, so maybe we ought to do better with that. We could do better with quad using, perhaps. We can incorporate more DWA extensibility into this, which means you can extend it yourselves to manipulate your own types. Async and await is something that would be really good to get in here. Every time I think about it, it makes my head hurt. So I need to go around that loop a few more times to know exactly what we may or may not be able to do. But generally, if there's stuff about the existing framework bridge that is always slightly jarred, you've always found a little bit annoying, why do I have to do this, why isn't this easier, then do let us know, because we might not be able to change that bridge, but we can probably make this new bridge a lot better. On that note, I've got about 1 minute for questions, if there are any. Please do come to the front, though, so that we can record the thing on the microphone. If there aren't any, I'll take it just because there was no surprises and everything did what everyone expected it to do, and that's good. Brill. All right, well, thank you. It's coffee now. We'll be back in 30 minutes.